Okay, I think I have all the proper buttons pressed for you to hear me clearly, and right now you do see me as well. But I think for the most part, I will have my video cam off so we can focus on the screen. Let me know how many of you are trying to do this on a phone today, so I might give you a little more direction on that. This is meant to be simply a preview, so it's not the same as trying to focus and learn from this. Most of the time I suggest you do not do things on a cell phone. The screen's just too tiny, but otherwise you are in mute only mode. Every so often I vigilantly shut off more sound so that you know we can all hear clearly. If you have any opening questions or things you want me to address today, if I can at all do so, I will be happy to. Anyway, I probably didn't introduce myself formally to you, but this is Lorna Sikorsky. I'm the owner of LDS and Associates and the author of the assessment battery that we're going to be discussing today, because it's in a brand new 6th edition, which I am very excited about. It has been around for a very long time, and I did ask you when you signed up for today how many of you were brand new to the whole concept of accent assessments, and who among you had already done them, and who among you routinely works with accent. But I think the numbers are quite evenly split. So please feel free to ask questions. Coming from another perspective, I'm trying to hit the middle ground here, and yet signal the previous owners of the P.O.E.C. what is different, and to signal to people totally for whom this is totally new, what is, I think, great about the P.O.E.C. So I'm going to, as I say, shut my webcam down right now so that you can focus on the screen pretty much exclusively. So as we start in, I think this is really a great way to begin this, and I thought about it for a bit, but I think we always begin assessments, or should, as I used to tell my students, with questions. At the end of this testing session, what do you want answers to? And I think that's really an important issue. Well, this assessment battery, the P.O.E.C, Proficiency in Oral English Communication, is hopefully being used because you have in front of you a North American ESL speaker, and you are trying to figure out the level of their speaking skills. And I think posing it as a question is quite helpful to you. How clear is your oral English? Or in a nutshell, your accent for North American English. The companion piece to this is the whole concept of language fluency. How accurate and how appropriately sophisticated is your American English, or very often we try to use NAE because it's for this whole region here, and that is the more global term for it. And as I mentioned very quickly in my training, it's not that you, as someone who's going to focus on speaking skills, needs to do an in-depth, full-blown interview strategy ESL assessment, but you do want to know if they have adequate skills, as I'll mention later. But what I would like to suggest is let's break it down further. Questions I ask are, how skillfully do you, meaning the client or the person in front of you, use stress, pitch, and other music rules of NAE? I'm going to use a shortcut. How well do you pronounce the NAE sounds? How sharp is your ear for sounds and hidden NAE rules? And what happens in spontaneous communication? Because I'm doing formal, fairly contrived testing, right? And so do I see support for the data I get from my formal testing? And hopefully, do I get something else? Well, you balance this with, I think, some assurance from your session that the language skills of the person in front of you is at least, and this is why I put it in bold, sufficient to be in my kind of instruction program. And there's the operative word. We all intervene at different levels of fluency. We're all comfortable at different levels of fluency. I have done programs as companion pieces for ESL with high beginners, although that is extremely challenging, but it should still be done, and low intermediate, where many of you might be much more comfortable intervening with at least a high intermediate level fluency. So that's a key issue. So this is the name of the assessment, Proficiency in Oral English Communication. And when I first created the acronyms, I didn't realize that people would be calling it the P.O.E.C or P.O.E.C, which is kind of funny because I never thought of it that way. So in more current editions, I have put the periods back in so because it sounds better to me to call it the P.O.E.C, but that's just that's really a silly element. But this particular battery is a blended product in modern times for me. There's the truly hard copy score sheets, and flip style test plates. Fairly standard, right? But over the last edition or so, we have made portions of it downloadable, and we have really expanded that this time around. The manual is completely downloadable, meant to be put on your device. What's the old adage? When in doubt, read the manual. Well, very often we don't really want to look at the manual much. So that is one of the key issues that I think is helpful. It allows me to really expand the manual, include an awful lot of visual point and shoot how-tos, and I think we all need that. The other thing that started in the last edition, and gradually we've been rolling it out to select people, is a test plate slideshow. And frankly, I think this is really where most of us should be going. It's a good spiral bound test plate set, but you are limited in size, and I just, as you will see later, I think this works much better. We also now, for this edition, have a downloadable fill-in, let's call it a template. And we'll look at it later, but this was probably one of the most difficult things to give birth to for this edition. And I'm really excited about that, because as you go peopling not only data, info data on the client, but scores, they auto-calculate and flow to the next level of analysis. Also, what you have is 6 different appendices. Now, don't get too excited. Many of these are just info, but some of them are great printables. So we took the things out of the manual that we said, you know, you're going to want to print these. Put a little icon next to it, and some of them may be things that you will print and want to have right next to you. Well, I mentioned questions at the beginning, and how does this assessment battery address those questions? That's a realistic issue. So one of the big questions, probably one of the more important ones for you if you're working on their accent, is you want to know how well they pronounce the NAE sounds. Well, that is covered in subtest 4, a traditional looking articulation battery. Use it in use a particular word or say the word alone and use it in a sentence. And in the process of carefully structuring it, I try to reveal very intensively all the vowels of the language, as well as consonants and a few of the unusual production issues. And that has been improved too, as we'll see. The second big linchpin of oral communication skills is how skillfully do you use stress, pitch, and other music rules. And formally, we have 3 different subtests here that cover that. So you can see we have 4 subtests right here that cover the sounds of the language and the what I call intonation of the language, moving intonation progressively from word to more extended speech. Well, going forward, I asked other questions. How sharp is your ear for the sounds and hidden NAE rules? That's covered as a starting look-see at their auditory discrimination skills in subtest 6. I think most of this is done as you go exploring different issues to address in your sessions, but you want a good starting bit of information because frankly, if they don't perform that well in this particular subtest, you are going to have to acknowledge that as you structure your learning so that you really recognize that their ear or their discrimination skills need to be improved concurrently. Well, remember I said, and I know a number of you are saying, whoa, I'm not doing language in my sessions, but still, you know, if you want to know, have they got enough language to be in the kind of program I want? For example, if you are working with someone, you may make this assumption that they have at least a high intermediate language fluency for English, and so that you can say, oh, we use that in present tense, change it to the past, or this is a statement, make it a question, or well, this is one word. Can you think of other words that are synonyms? Well, they have to have a lot of language to manipulate to do that, and that may hamper you even for the timeline you picked for your course. So, in the process of doing the sounds of the language in subtest 4, you get a 56 utterance sample, 56 sentences that they generate. So you can just do a raw tally count of the sheer number of grammar and usage errors. That gives you information. Plus, you are going to have some language samples, as we see on the right-hand side shortly. And from that, you can do a raw tally count on those too. And at least not be too surprised when you start your program. Well, then the last question I think is really important. What happens in spontaneous communication? Okay, I've done, all of this formal testing and I've talked to them a little bit, but do I see support for my formal testing? So within the assessment battery, you have subtest 1, which is like an intake survey. I call it a one-on-one conversation. You can get a lot of feedback from that. And subtest 7, where you can do a monologue, perhaps add a quick graded reading, or maybe you want another real world setting. And we added this time an optional third speech activity, because I know that some of our attendees are university people, and they are perhaps maybe a little less concerned with their communication skills within their professional milieu or whatever. But for many of us in private consulting, the company is the one who is paying for these services, and the onus is on us to improve their skills to make them more effective communicators in the workplace. So many times I have often added a third activity saying, gee, can I review that recorded meeting you had? Can I see a snippet of a speech you gave last week? Can I see how you do web training? Getting more and more of that too. So it was time to formally add that. Well, before we start digging in to look at it visually, a few more pointers, things I'd like to mention. Who is this target audience? I want to be clear that this is for ESL adults. And by adults, I mean, and it has been used, late high school comfortably and intermediate level ESL comfortably. It's not that you can't make modifications. I think for the most part in here are speech paths who are used to scaling their content, and some of the more experienced ESL instructors are as well. But if you wanted to pick up a battery and bring it in to someone and know that fairly reliably there wouldn't be anything that will suddenly appear that do not seem appropriate. I guess the other thing I did not put in here, this is not rehabilitative or healthcare settings that we are giving in our content, because I wanted this to be more globally and universally applicable. I guess my biggest concern was not making it too childlike, which many SLP accent sound assessments are, and also not wanting to make it rehabilitative, because I feel that most of these people, as it says in bullet 3, this is primarily geared for those already in the work environment. The hilarious word that comes to mind when I say that is the word garbage or trash, which is on the in the assessment battery, because here at least most individuals somehow have to manage trash and garbage, take the garbage out, and that is such a minor element, but that may not be their experience overseas, where they may frankly have someone who does that for them. And from the highest to the lowest, most of us have to take care of our own garbage. So additional to that, it's a 7th grade reading level that you can be assured. And that's important too, because in the workplace, many, maybe not most, it depends on how you are structuring your programs, but that is a level that is an assumption for their professional life. The final assumption, which I didn't put down here, is that you have some experience with, well, it's actually geared for ESL professionals who have a fairly accessible linguistic background and SLPs who are familiar with the IPA. I do not make any assumptions beyond that, but the narrow transcription is presented as the means for doing the sound testing, and all of that information is presented in there. The other thing I will mention is you're not asked to transcribe in IPA anything in the articulation subtest for the IPA is already there. You are simply modifying what is missing. Administration is always another key issue that I get questions on. This is meant for individual one-on-one, all right? It can be done live, but it can also be done distance learning, especially with the modifications. For example, the test plates online. This definitely lends itself to that, and frankly, in labs, it also lends itself to that in some university settings. There are 7 subtests, but the bottom bullet suggests that some of you may not have 60 to 75 minutes administration time. I usually suggest that a 90-minute session is plenty to cover the assessment and also to chat with them briefly without running away from them, to at least tell them, yes, I'm glad you're here. This is a good fit for you. I see plenty of things that we can work on, and you are the right person for this program. Years ago, somebody told me, when we got done, I wish you had said a little something to me about that, because I kind of wasn't sure if I was in the right place. That's appalling, but I'll tell on myself. That happened early on, and I've always been very quick now to make sure I spend a few minutes chatting with them and reassuring them that this was a smart thing for them to do. Analysis time is going to be interesting because I say the average is 60 minutes because of all the basic math calculations and pushing and shoving data around demands that. So for hard copy administration, that's still the case. But now with this, I'll call it semi-automated because not every single thing is auto calculated or peopled into every single window in the assessment. But our opening beta testing of it says that this is reducing time considerably, because for many of the subtests, including all of the intonation, any scoring you do automatically is calculated. So that's a really valuable, I think, process for us. Well, how does this work if it's part hard copy and part downloadable? Well, you order it and you receive a letter with your invoice. Many of you already use the MEEC and know this. It gives you a license number. Well, what is that license number going to be for all of the downloadable components? It asks you to go register that license. It takes less than 5 minutes to do so, but that allows us to give you more information later. And then voila, with your password, you'll open up the access to the P.O.E.C. and all of the various files that I mentioned to you, or click one nice zip file. These are not large files, no audio files in this, so this is very easy to do. These are single user licenses. Well, what does that mean? That means that you can you purchase it, it is yours, and you can upload it or download it. I forget, I never know how that's supposed to go. on up to 3 personal devices. And I think that is really important because you want to ask yourself, perhaps it's just easier for you to put it downloadable on everything, but that may not be what you need. The manual you may only want on your mainframe. You don't need that, but the appendices, maybe you want those on all the devices, or you want to open them up and print them and stash that with your score booklets. And the test plate slideshow, where do you want that? Well, maybe it's on your home computer because that's where you do distance learning. I put it on my iPad because that's where I do distance learning as well. Actually, I put that one everywhere. But, you know, it's up to you where you decide you want to put that. Well, there's 2 different ways you can go. Oh, there's a quick question already. Is it support? Yes. The new Adobe, I've been very careful. Any files that you are downloading are PDF, Adobe PDFs. They are mutually downloadable on Mac or iPad, but true to form, iPad has a few little odd wrinkles, which some of you have encountered. And you know, you just have to get the hang of how to download it on your particular device, but no problems are reported, especially with that test plate slideshow. That was a great question. Thank you. Well, you make a decision. Many of you in the university settings who are supervising grad students might say, geez, I just want to have the hard score sheets and the test plates. That way, you know, several of them can use them. Well, that's fine. The initial purchase always includes 20, and some universities do so much testing they order 100 at a time for that, but they're always replaceable. So you would have in front of the client the hard copy material, and you would do your scoring in the hard copy score booklet, the analysis. The alternate is, though, that some of you still have the ability to make a decision. You know, for some, you might say, I don't want to have it on my iPad. Others might want to. You make that decision. You have that option. Well, the second choice is pick your delivery. Am I going to use test plates or the slideshow? And then for the most part, you will probably have in front of you while your client is there the fill-in template that I will show you. Taking a lot of information, saving it a few times as you go along. I always download it and save it to their name as we start doing the assessments. But not every subtest can be completely done that way. Or you may, and the articulation is the one that can't be done that way. I'll look at that, show you that shortly. You still have to do your scoring on the form and eventually bring in all the information later. So I'll show you what that is shortly, because I'd like to go into that right now, and I'm going to pull that up. I'd also going to take a quick look and see what anybody has put in for questions in case I've missed any, but I think that is it so far. All right, so I am going to pull up and resume my screen show, and I'm hoping that this, of course, all this extra stuff around the edges you wouldn't have, but you would open this nice and big on your screen. Now, some of you might say, oh, I had this in my edition too, but I have improved it. But I do like this business of being able to point and jump around to subtests. And I know there are many of you that chafe at doing things exactly in a particular way, and you might like to organize your setting differently. Well, this allows you to do that. And please note, when you click away and pick a particular subtest, you have a little house for a home button. Well, that's not that important an issue perhaps, but it does seem to make a difference. And then I've added the delivery tips as part of it. So it tells you how to maneuver around. I think it's really important to play with something a little bit before you go to try to deliver it. Very helpful on that. One of the things I'd like to show you is simply how big and how nice it looks visually. So even if you aren't doing this distance learning, I think that you, and I'm going to jump around to another subtest, I think that you would enjoy and your clients would be drawn to this a little more than to the little flip cards. I also made the bottom navigation easy for you so that if you skip something or hit 2 at the same time or wanted to go back, it's easy to do that. I'm flipping around just so you can see that. One of the things I am really excited about, only an author would get excited about things like this, I suppose. But anyway, I don't like having lots of little bits of paper when I'm doing work with a client. And I didn't like them playing with the monologue talking points that I always had printed and even put in a slip sheet. But I thought, I think this is really important to have some consistency, some family resemblance for a monologue. So why not put it in there? And after we did the P.O.E.C screen updates, I realized that as I'm getting organized, ready to start scoring, why don't I have them silently read this and see what, it tells them column to column, and then they can look up at me and say, I'm ready. And by then I'm ready to start taking notes. And then I open the next page. And I have a number of questions on this that I think are adequate to solicit the information that they can keep looking at it. I can gesture to them, pick another question, find something else in there to talk about. But some of you, I know, are doing studies, or I might make this a little bigger so you can see what I'm talking about. Doing studies, and you may have something else you want on screen for them. And so I've added a separate file where you can customize the talking points you want to put in there. And that's just another bit of, I think, customization for this assessment battery that I always had to do, but I thought would be great for you to have access to right off the bat. Well, at this point then, and I'm going to make this you can see all of the colored blocks here, but I'm going to make this much larger just so you can see that I can pick information, and maybe as I start the opening speech sample, I can be getting ready if they're not ready. Again, as a nod to researchers or people doing studies, oftentimes the person rating the language samples is different from the examiner. So you can put a name in there or maybe something else. Some of you, again, are in a position where you do not want their name on there. So you may say, oh, I don't want that. We're going to assign a code uh, because that, you know, meets the obligations in our particular setting. That is something that I have added to this, as well as the screen. You can rate testing conditions, et cetera, and fill in information. So that shows you subtest 1 as you move forward. I'll make this, remember we talked about intonation. I'm not going into the literal, but you know, if you wanted to explore their word level intonation, this would be this subtest. So I can make it larger on my screen too, so I can see, and all I simply need to do is mark errors and put the information down that they have, bonus points that they could get, but I could also add some other details. I could put some transcription or phonetic information there that helps me figure out why, you know, what I heard at a particular time. I like to collect lots of information. It then, as looking at the bottom, will people the scoring. Oops, I keep touching too many things here. People the scoring here. I also like to make comments. I'm going to put something down that I would like to behaviorally that I could just quietly tap away on my computer and do. So that is the nature of what happens. I'm just going to click a few things. For subtest 3, the same sort of deal. Those of you who have given the test before are familiar with the content, but it has always been a situation where the targets are very discrete, so you are just you know, looking at very specific things in each test. And so again, what I love, it collects the data and gives you the tally count so that you can go forward. I'm going to just show you that remember I said that I could not and did not think it was legitimate to try to do all of the articulation that way because putting narrow transcription around and having to do that was just took way too much computer know-how to do, and I did not think it was really warranted that. So these are the pages that I think would be, let's call them scratch sheets, where this particular subtest, you would probably have the hard copy in front of you. But when you're done, you would be in a position where you could put the information on and tally count all the way through. And even start collecting the data on glaring grammar and usage types of putting the transcription in. You could do that. Going forward, again, you know, it continues all the way through. The vowel analysis, and looking forward, the consonant analysis. This is where you would put have the data that you are collected. What it will do, it will allow you to just put the number in that you have for each of the categories, and it will then people the final tallies of information. Also, putting by error types and all of that would be automatically done for you. So as much as we could, we put that analysis information in here that could be auto scored, and it's really been a great addition. Again, another subtest 5, more intonation. The same thing happens here. You can mark where the errors are, and I'm just simply scrolling down for you to see that they actually people the boxes depending on how many things you put in them. I do know that many of the individuals are utilizing other tools in that are available in Adobe, so that you could actually put lines in and all of that in the final copy. You can certainly do that if you are more proficient at that. But what I would like to make this a bit smaller so I can move ahead quickly to show you other things. I got made too many things here. If you go forward, for example, another thing that we added is formal rating scales for all of the samples, and that's a big deal new element. I really enjoyed what that did for our P.O.E.C screening tool, and so I have included the rating scales that allow you to use it for the monologue. And notice it has already put my name, and anything that could be moved forward in the item in a particular way will go forward. But it will tally up your numbers and tell you based on what you said your final rating was, it will improve that. So you have the ability to do a formalize your rating of all of the speech activities. So remember I mentioned that you might have other samples that you would be doing. There are note-taking pages that you can fill in with data. And then it starts analysis. And once again, anything that is nuisance, which in my mind is just strictly the math issues, and could be done more efficiently and probably more accurately, I have incorporated into this assessment. So any of the errors, remember when I was clicking around on word level, subtest 2, well, it tells me what the tally is. Anything that I wrote as comments transfers over. Same thing, I messed around with this one for normal intonation, and for subtest 5, just playing with it. It gives me the data fairly quickly. Same for anything, all the other elements. Again, remember I mentioned, at least you want to know how intact and how sophisticated their language is. So the language level observations can be here. At the very least, I want to know how many grammar and usage errors per 5 minutes maybe. That'll give me a feel for how much interference that runs for these individuals. Going forward, because I just saw a question fly in, and this is the issue too. We look at things on initially as errors, the errors, counting up the errors, but the final summary tallies are all done in percentages of accuracy. And that is great. Notice the little cut line. Well, that'll be a print line if you were to print it, but a lot of places it could be that a nice tight final summary would be good. And so we have a blow-by-blow of everything that we have uncovered. Going down to the very bottom, I'll try to make it larger to see and slide down so that you can see are your ratings and your summary statements. Well, your summary statements will people in from various settings that you had, but then at this point you might say, well, I need to smooth this out a little bit. Let me take all this information. It at least moves it. And you can take all that information and clean it up, perhaps, make it into a nice cohesive summary of effectiveness by looking at how good or poor their intonation skills, their listening skills, their sound clarity, and their language skills are. So that really is kind of the cursory run through of the score booklet, showing everything that is or what the possibilities are for you in that. But if we wanted to just put a point on it, well, what's different from older editions? Let's go through that. Each edition has had some stimuli improvements, words that I didn't like anymore, hadn't for a while. Xerox was one of them from an earlier edition that had been changed, but there are other ones too. But that has been cleaned up well, I think. I have added some more contractions, which I think is very relevant. There are improved options to alter the articulation subtest for your region. Some of you, chafe at certain vocabs and want to change the IPA, and this allows, I provide alternates, ones that are pretty classic alternates for different regions, and you can in your analysis acknowledge those and not lose track of your count. There are notable changes in the examiner prompts because I put into print what I've always done, and that is add interjections, leave space to say, put their name here when you talk to them, add space to add their language, etc. And if you're smart, you will make those changes before you walk in there, and then you've got a much more engaged exchange. Anything you can do to improve the dynamics means your assessment will more quickly replicate what is happening in real life. One brand new thing that I've always had in there but never really went forward with it. A few editions back, I started making notations of what I call communication miscues, situations where you have given somebody clear instructions, they have not asked you to clarify, and they go off in a different direction. Those are communication miscues, which in the workplace especially are the things that really impact their effectiveness as communicators. So now we have a way of tracking that in all the subtests. You can, on review of your video, say, geez, I missed that. Look at that. He didn't pay any attention. I even in some subtests ask you to deliberately challenge the clarity of your speech and see if they say, oh, I'm sorry, what did you just say? Anything that indicates that they are taking control of the situation. Again, there is improved data flow directions. Every place in the print book now, I think that you are taking the data from the actual subtests and you're going, where does this go now? It tells you exactly where to move that. I think that we had done some of that, but improved. The slideshow alternate, I think, is the biggest deal, and adding the monologue to that slideshow. By the way, that is not in the hard copy edition of the test plates. But that is certainly something you can easily pull up on a screen separately if you know, or print and do to have that as well. But it flows so nice and seamlessly and looks great on screen as well. Significant changes in the whole direction of subtest 7, all of the samples, new rating scales, much more formalized note-taking. So the score booklet is bigger, but for legitimate reasons to make things larger, point size so you can see, and everything else. Significant changes, as I said, in the look of the hard copy for readability. I think that old users will appreciate. I think the auto calculations for errors and accuracy are going to be really significant, as well as that new final page that you could tear out and use. Well, that's it. I think I've answered all the questions. Does anybody have any additional question that they want to ask as we're going through? Okay. Well, if this looks like something that's going to meet your needs, it is not in the store yet. I am still, you are the formal launch of it. Earlier this year, we had a level 1 series, and this was included for them to get a feel for it. So now the P.O.E.C. still contains the 20 score booklets, the test plates, the hard copy, but you have for everyone now the slideshow and the PDF form, whether you use it for everybody or not, it is there, and appendices to download and print. I saw a question just fly by, and I just don't know what was that. You said, can each subtest be printed off for you to write on? You get the score booklets anyway, which I think answers your question. Let me see if I can pull you up. Oh, maybe she's not on. Vicki, is your mic open? Or I opened it. Can you talk? Well, she wanted to know if you use the online form, can you do that? Oh, she doesn't have a mic. That's okay. I was just going to address that. You have the hard copy forms anyway, so you still have the ability to do that. And so I do know that some people like to do a portion of the test and only do certain elements. So even if that was another question here, even if you were doing only a piece of the test, would it still auto score? And it will. It'll pull up as much data as you decide to give. So that will work for you that way. You can, or if you, as long as your files are saved on your computer, you can open up it again and start at any point and do it that way. I don't think there are any other questions. I have a very significant discount for the individuals who want to get a newer edition of it, and for people who have attended today. So I will be sending that off to you. the new attendees can get this assessment battery at 40% off. The people who have one already, I'm sweetening that quite a bit because I would really like to see a lot of you move forward with the improvements and the coverage that you can deliver in pieces or all of it. So I will be sending that off with a note here so that you can get that tomorrow. And it was great having you here. Thanks for your questions, and I hope to see you in another event soon. Take care.